should get you, both of you, I think.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Control and Regulatory Board meeting this day, the 10th of October 2019. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing on the County Council website after this meeting. Please turn your microphones on when you are speaking and turn them off when you are finished speaking. Membership of today's committee, Mrs. Richardson is substituting for Mr. Harrison, Mr. Bolter is substituting for Mr. Crooks, and Dr. Feltham is filling in the vacant Conservative place on this committee at this time. Moving on to the agenda, item number 1 is minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of September 2019. Would someone move those minutes if...
You're happy to move the minutes, Chairman?
By Bill.
Second, Chairman.
Second by Tony. Thank you. Item 2 is question time. I understand no questions have been received. Item 3, questions asked by members under standing orders. There's none of those been received either. To advise of any other items the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda, we propose to take the agenda as it is. Item 5 is declarations of interest. It is noted that members who are also members of a parish, town, district or liaison committee will have personal interest in those applications which relate to areas covered by those authorities. Are there any further declarations at this time? There seems to be no, Ewan. Okay. Item number 6 is presentations of petitions. I understand no petitions have been received. Moving on to the applications, item number 7 is an application by Mr. and Mrs. Allen to divide the public bridleway, Quenby Hall, in the parish of Ungerton. Could I ask Mr. Cross to just kick off with this, and then I'd like Edwin to come into it and present the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. This report then is an application for a public path diversion order at Quenby Hall. With regard to the statutory provisions you need to be familiar with, they are set out for you at paragraph 12. This is an application that has to be considered under the provisions of the Highways Act. The factual circumstances will now be outlined by my colleague Mr. McWilliam, but before he does that, I would just add that dependent on the board's decision, if the board's decision is to agree the officer recommendation, the application then has to be advertised, and if there are any objections at that stage, the matter then goes forward for a public inquiry. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, the application is reasonably straightforward in that it is simply an application to divert a bridleway, and if you have a look at the plan on the screen currently, the existing route is the solid black line. It does curve to the south of the hall currently, and the intent of the order would be to divert the path further away from the house itself. At the time of the application, there were two main areas set out by the applicant. One was that the applicant had longer term plans to possibly reinstate gardens to the south of the existing route. But actually the pressing issue, and in fact the issue that we've followed through in terms of this application, is one plain and simply one of privacy. Again, on screen, you can see the extent of the proposed diversion. The white line is where the bridleway currently goes. You can see the house just within the circular area in the top centre of the screen. And the applicant, off their own bat actually, has decided to lay out a route for the public to use should the application be successful. That's actually laid out with, it's quite a mix. It's mainly earth, but it's also loose stone underneath and then finished off on top of that. This is a plan showing the wider network and how it affects the green routes are bridleways and the purple ones are footpaths. Up here we've got Hungerton, Keam over to the left, Tilton's just off the screen on this side. It's Cold Overton just there. It's actually a very not very populated area, I think is the best phrase to say. There's a number of deserted medieval village sites there actually, but you can see sticking out of the bottom there, the red route there. That's the diversion that they're actually looking at and applying for. Now, currently, the current route obviously takes you nearer to the hall. Hence, from the applicant's respect, the request to move it further away for privacy. This is the view of the hall as you leave the main drive, which clearly is a very good view of the residence. And it then works directly round to the south, and the public actually tend to just hug the ha-ha there. And you see the property very close to at that point. Now, I know it's been said to us that some of the public do actually climb up on that wall, get good views and occasionally potter into the garden as well, and that's one of the things they'd like to lessen. And then looking where the path comes back into the main track, we're looking back now towards the house on the far side, and you can see it through the trees. So you actually go all around the house itself. Now, the proposed alternative route actually leaves the drive further away, about 2 to 3 times further away, but you've still got the distant view of the house frontage there, very much the same but further away. You're then taken on what is a made up track now down the valley, and rather than skirting the house and staying on the inside of the woodland, you get this large vista opening up in front of you as you look down the valley either side. Again, you can still see the house as you move around the diversion as you're looking back. Obviously it's further away, but you do get that good vista looking back. That again is the valley floor as you're coming down to the bottom. I should add at this point that the existing route is, although it crosses fairly uneven farmland, that is under pasture, probably has been for many hundreds of years. Not a track as such once you leave the main entrance track, but it's reasonably flat. I mean, you do go up and down in parts. This one, because you're opening up this wide view and going around the outside, you are dropping down the valley to a certain extent and then climbing back up. So there are some elevation changes. And this is the track going back up to the top to get to the point where, in fact, we were on the previous one. And again, as you see there, you can actually see the house and the other side, albeit further away. The existing route would actually be hugging again that wall, that ha-ha you actually see there, and then cutting across. And there we are back at the route, the overall site, which probably gives you the best idea of the extent of the diversion, and that's the woodland you see at this point that obviously masks your views out when you're up here, but you skirt around at the bottom. Conversely, obviously you're much further away from the property down here, certainly, but you have nice views here, here, and at that end, but again, further away. Now, the authority in terms of making an order, a diversion order under 109 of the Highways Act, the primary facet of the legislation is to allow landowners or occupiers to do just that. Certainly on the grounds of privacy, that's a perfectly good reason to make an application to us to move a path. And we merely have to accept that it's in the interests of the occupier to do so, and clearly in this instance we're perfectly satisfied that it is in the interests of the occupier. Having said that, taking a longer term view, we are supposed to consider the wider issues as well, and there are two main aspects. Firstly, this path's not substantially less convenient. There's the overall route. Now, we have measured the two, including the elevations, etc. We expect somebody on foot to take about 2 minutes longer on the diverted route. And in fact, when we're looking at substantially less convenient, we are probably looking at the path wider as a whole, rather than just that particular section. I personally don't feel there is any significant difference to using the path with the diversion, rather than heading straight by the hall. And there's also the effect that moving the path will have on the public enjoyment. Now, I think, as you probably hear from others today, there are concerns around losing close access to the hall and its attractiveness, and in fact that is something that was focused on in terms of the letters of concern that we received regarding the application. So first was that view of the hall and the proximity of it and the ability for people to actually look at the building. Clearly a view in terms of a building is not specifically in the legislation something that would prevent a diversion going ahead, but it would be something in there in the overall mix of things when considering the general enjoyment of the path as a whole. And I stress the path as a whole, not just this section, but walking the path from beginning and actually to the end. I've covered the issue of I've covered the issue of the distance, but the other aspect that was picked up was this falling away in the land that I mentioned, and the fact that you are going downhill. There's quite a steep bit here actually, and then you turn around the corner and then you head uphill you're rising, but you're rising in a perfectly straightforward way. Now, from my perspective, I've actually did actually walk the route. I felt it to be perfectly okay, and I juxtaposed that with the views and the vistas that were actually opened up in terms of that. I don't consider that a particularly difficult route to use at all, and since the track has been laid out on the new route, I have to say it's quite easy to use, certainly compared to the majority of the network in the summer months. Finally, I'm just going through some other aspects. I think Mr. Barnett's here today, so he'll be able to pick up on a few points that he actually wishes to pick up. But what I should say in terms of this, and coming back to the original diversion itself, and there is actually another section to this. There's another bridleway that comes in at this point here, and that's just being moved here at the same time if the order went through, and that's just to reach an existing crossing point that the public tend to use anyway, and just dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of that particular proposal. So coming back to the final issue, I'm perfectly satisfied that the reasons stated to move the path fit within the legislative framework. In terms of those other aspects and taking a longer term view, I don't consider that the diversion here is making the route substantially less convenient for the public, nor do I feel that they are losing their enjoyment of the route. Indeed, the new route has its own pleasures in its own right. But of course, these things are always on a balance matter. But in broad terms, I'd like to commend that the order actually be made and put out for public consultation.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. We have two speakers this afternoon on this application. I'll read them out in order that they've been given to me. Mr. G. Barnett, local resident, and Joanne Allen, Quenby Hall. Mr. Barnett, you've been asked to speak first. If you'd like to sit over there. If you just press your microphone when you want to start speaking, and if you'd remain in your seat when you finish speaking, just in case any councillors want to ask you any points of clarification on what you've actually said today, not on the application. So start when you're ready, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hearing me this afternoon. My name is Geoffrey Barnett. I'm a resident of Keam, and I have walked this footpath and bridleway since 1983, when I came to Leicestershire to attend the university for a postgrad. You will note from your papers that the Ramblers Association and the Leicester Footpath Association have made representations. I would like to point out, and those organisations do sterling work, but most walkers are not members of such pressure groups, and I, in a way, am speaking for those who are not. If this case goes against me and Mr. Faulkner, then others will be lodging objections, and they will be presenting them to an independent inspector. So I'm simply add that to say that it's not just me on my lonesome. There's Mr. Faulkner and up to 9 other residents in Hungerton who would be speaking to the inspector. Quenby Hall is a Grade 1 listed Jacobean building, built between 1618 and 1636. Nicholas Pevsner described it, he's an architectural historian, as the most important 17th century house in the county of Leicestershire. The approach is designed to impress. The present walk goes to within 50 yards of the gate, then skirts tightly round the south side, then resumes on a firm track to Cold Newton. It's the finest walk of its kind in the county. It's been enjoyed by county people since 1636. Rights of way are historically important. My submissions of this have been deleted from the composite summary of my submissions. However, this is what they would have said if they were before you. Rights of way define the warp and weft of the land. They tell a story. They carry gravitas. They are not to be lightly discarded. One of the crying shames of the hedge clearing subsidies of the 1970s was that the field boundaries recorded in the Domesday Book, which as you all know was a Norman audit of wealth, were ignorantly ripped up. I know not the long-term history of this path, but it will tell a story, and it's not to be discarded lightly. There were 2 reports. You have that one before you now. Report number 1 was an absolute reverse of that which you've heard from the officer here. I know not why, but before you come to a decision, I would request that you did read report number 1 rather than the completely different one which you have now. And you can ask your own questions as to why they differ so much. I can't understand why. Further, report number 2 is in error in that it says that the public are in error for following the ha-ha. They're not. They're following the county council's yellow designated posts. That's why they walk along the ha-ha wall. I was there yesterday. Furthermore, it was I who pointed out to the council might have found this out themselves, that the definitive map puts the course of the right of way, puts the course of the right of way a little bit further from the ha-ha path. I pointed that out. There's Italianate garden. Now, the garden is Grade 2 listed. You may hear that this is the reason why this is going ahead, to to make the garden. I think it would be folly to grant this huge diversion for an Italianate garden which may or may not actually be built. I think it would be wise for the applicant for the diversion to put in planning permission to build it, and then put before the council that they'd like the right of way diverted. Otherwise, I would urge put no weight on such a claim. There is a walk time distance methodology error by the officer. The simple distance of the path should not be simply divided by its length and a 3 miles per hour walking pace. We all know that walking on the flat on a good surface is different to walking on a bad surface up and downhill. It substantially increases the time. So the public will be substantially less convenienced as a result of the diversion. And report 1 records the same. I walked the path yesterday and I met Rachel Rowell of Cold Newton. She informed me that she's an equestrian, and she uses it 5 times a week, she told me. Her horse sank to the depth of between fetlock and hock. I'm not an equestrian. I think it's about that much. She also informed me that a sludge hall equestrian suffered the same purpose. It's very muddy down at the bottom. It is 1 in 5 gradient. 1 in 5. The Equalities Act, the disabled are substantially disadvantaged. There's no statutory right to make footpaths disabled friendly, but equally it is desperate folly to needlessly make existing footpaths far harder / impossible for disabled people. Rowdies. You may hear something that the hall is plagued by rowdies. The hall...
Sorry, Mr. Barnett, but your time's up. Your 5 minutes has passed.
Very good, thank you.
Are any members of the committee wanting to ask Mr. Barnett any questions? No, it looks like you're free to go, Mr. Barnett.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry you was cut short, but the time's the time. Could I ask Joanne Allen, please, to come forward, and if you'd like to sit over. If you'd like to just sit at the desk, Mrs. Allen, and you'll have the similar sort of 5 minutes to Mr. Barnett, and if you'd remain in your seat when you've finished speaking, just in case anyone wants to ask you any questions on what you've said today. But please begin with speaking and switch your microphone on when you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Unfortunately, my husband is unable to attend as he's away on business, but my words come from both of us. We remain puzzled and disappointed by continued objections. We have personally consulted with the Leicestershire and Rutland Footpath Association, the Ramblers, the Parish Council, the Leicestershire Bridleways Association, and the British Horse Society. We have worked tirelessly to address their needs within the statutory criteria. Some of the comments made by the 2 objectors are not relevant or appear to be of a very personal nature. Putting those aside and focusing on the statutory criteria, what are we actually talking about? The fact is, we're talking about a diversion of 2 minutes. 2 minutes for an average walker, and of course less if you're on horseback or on a bicycle. Whilst consulting with user groups, they all raised the concern over the surface of the proposed route. As a consequence, we worked extensively to improve the drainage before laying a firm surface comprising a sand, gravel and grass mix. The surface was then compressed to create a firm and consistent track. Subsequently, all user groups visited and approved our work, and even 2 of them expressed their gratitude that we'd gone to such lengths. It's surprising that the objectors believe that public enjoyment would be adversely affected. Mr. Faulkner, who I thought was going to be speaking today, argues that the public would be deprived of a magnificent view of the facade of Quenby Hall. The user groups do not agree. I've now been speaking for 2 minutes. 2 minutes is the length of time it would take for the proposed new route. The user groups concluded that there are still fine views of the hall within the surrounding landscape. Furthermore, there are very attractive views of the surrounding hills and hollows, including a view of the Bilsden Coplow and a view down to the old railway, which are not visible from the existing route. These comments were made by user groups and an officer with specific and relevant experience at the Leicestershire County Council. Mr. Faulkner also raises the issue of those with disabilities being inconvenienced. I'm assuming he means physical disabilities. The existing route is almost impossible to negotiate by wheelchair users. Interestingly, and most positively, a local resident's wheelchair-using son has actually been able to use the proposed new route due to its firm surface. He cannot use the existing route. I'd now like to move on to privacy. Quenby Hall is a labour of love. It's also our home. We have worked meticulously and respectfully to restore Quenby Hall back to its former glory. Sadly, some users of the bridleway and footpath have abused the route and have infringed our privacy due to the route being so close to our home. Views for users will not be diminished, as the official report confirms. We are glad about this, but importantly for us, our privacy is enhanced. We are trying to improve the enjoyment for those who share the beautiful landscape with us and give us a greater feeling of privacy within our home. As part of our commitment to the hall, its history and its future, we plan to resurrect the Italianate garden. But this all takes time. It's very disappointing that both objectors state that our plans are fictitious. That's insulting. Our plans are not fictitious. My time is almost up, and I would like to conclude by expressing our gratitude that after such careful consideration, an order is recommended. I sincerely hope it will be approved. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mrs. Allen. Any questions for Mrs. Allen? Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned, Miss Allen, about people encroaching onto your property. Do you get much of that? Do you get many trespassers, and how do you deal with it when you do get that happening?
Yes, we do. The vast majority of users are an absolute delight, but we do get people abuse it. We've had people picnicking on our lawn. Last summer, I had a group of lads on the back lawn, and my approach is not to be snooty and to say, get off my land, but to point out that they are actually on someone's private property. I've been told, well, that's your problem. I've been sworn at. I've had somebody with a huge lens taking close-up pictures of the house. We also had a group of people sat on the ha-ha wall, and my husband was disappointed, asked them very politely if they would move, took a photo of them, and we were then given several they swore at us, and they had children with them. I mean, it's just not very pleasant, and we don't like it.
Edwin, have you anything to add from what you've heard?
No, I thought...
Welcome back. How can I help you?
the internet's listening to me. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I thought both speakers very erudite, and I wish speakers who came here normally were that good, and thank you both actually on that score. I know that in terms of the consultations that did go out, or the low-key consultations, I think it's unfair to say the user groups were in any way against the proposal, and in fact there was no objection of any kind received from them. I hear what's said about the 2-minute measurement. That is just a swings and roundabouts issue in terms of downhill, uphill, and the slopes, etc. I'm just trying to read something. Just hold on a minute. Oh yes, and the other thing, which is a pertinent point actually, that was raised in terms of the previous report, which never actually got to the board, etc. This is one of these situations where I have to say there's, to a certain extent, no right or wrong answer for everybody. And actually, the two reports are very much the same report. There's very little language changed in the report. It's just the recommendation has changed because there was a further visit. And in terms of that visit, we had a good look at the actual route provided, re-walked it in terms of the length of it, the slopes, and indeed the state of the route, and found it to be in very, very good condition. And as a result of that was the previous concern we'd had to a large part. So the recommendation we really felt ought to be the other way round. And I should add also, sometimes when we divert paths, we're simply shoving them around the edges of fields, sometimes dog legs with square corners. And this one isn't attempting to do that, and the public are being given a very good surface to walk on as well.
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Mr. Cross, have you got anything to? You want to say anything else at this time?
No, thank you, Chairman. Nothing further to add.
Is there any comments from Mr. Galton, the local member?
I've spoken to Mr. Galton, but he doesn't wish to submit any comments.
Okay.
Yeah, move the recommendation, Chair.
Anyone else wish to speak? Maggie?
Thank you. I think, for me, I can see both points of view, but having a look at the Highways Act and Section 119, I quite appreciate the owner's need for privacy, etc. And I'm sure that the Highways Act on that part satisfies that. I'm not so sure, though, that it satisfies the public's interests, because I understand that this is part of a 3-horse walk, so I think people walk it because they actually want to see the hall. And taking away that close view of it, I think, will be reducing the enjoyment of the public. I think, as we say, I think the hall is, because it is a grade 1, I think public interest will always be in it, and I think even diverting the footpath will not necessarily stop people wanting to walk up that front stretch to have a look at it or to photograph the architecture. So I will be voting against this because I feel that part of it hasn't been addressed for me. In hindsight, I think I would very much have liked to have gone on a site visit. I probably didn't go on a site visit because having read the documentation before. And I would like to have seen if I could have walked that path within 2 minutes, because to me that looks challenging for 2 minutes. I don't know who's walked it in 2 minutes, but with an arthritic leg I don't know whether I would be able to do it. But I'd just like to put my comments on record, and that's why I'll be voting against it.
Michael?
Thank you, Chair. I did ring the officer yesterday and ask a question which I'm still awaiting the answer to.
I think about 3 or 4 years.
Thank you. The question was, how long have the current residents been there? Because the real concern for me is the length of time the hall and the path have been there. Hundreds of years. I mean, there are other issues. The proposed new path, I suspect somebody with a slight disability who can walk on level ground quite readily would not be able to do the new path. And I think if it goes to an inspector as the objectors wish, I think that would be a major consideration, because the rights of certain people have now been put at risk, and that is concerning. I need some clarity. It says in the second paragraph, the primary reason is the Italianate garden. Yet when Mr. McWilliam introduced it, he said the primary reason was privacy. Which is it, please?
I think the application is attached to the report. Certainly the garden was mentioned in the first instance, I think in part one of that. But it was quite clear from my point of view that the reason, and the officer dealing with it, the reason for actually applying for this diversion was, as said in the secondary sentence or paragraph, and that was on grounds of privacy. And I think to a certain extent the garden has caused a bit of a confusion between all parties here, because it's just not something that's on the table, and it's not something we're really considering.
Right. There was mention, there was a previous report that should have come to committee but was withdrawn. You've explained the reason why, and the difference between that one and this one being that you went out to look at the new path. I don't think that would make a deciding factor for me. I don't wish to be rude or belittle an officer's opinion, but just on that basis to change, to do such a volte-face, on that I find quite disturbing. And like I say, the primary reason is the length of time, the hall and the path that has been there. And I'm so disappointed in our officers not upholding the history and tradition of this area. I don't know how many users it gets. I mean, on the previous, we had an application a month ago, it gave us warts and all on the history of the footpath. It was only a tiny footpath we were talking about, but it gave us warts and all, who'd lived there, was it owned or not, blah, blah, blah. So little detail is with this report, which again is disturbing. So I agree with Mrs. Wright. I can't support this, but the primary reason is that house and footpath have been there a very long time, and it's enabled generations to enjoy the view. I accept there's a privacy issue, but the Allens moved in there knowing that footpath was already there. Due diligence was done on that house before they purchased it. I live in a terraced house. The footpath is outside my front door. I would love to get a diversion order on that, but it ain't going to happen, and it would be unrealistic to ask as well. So, I'm going to oppose this. And if it does go to objection, I'd be willing to stand up before the inspector and give the reasons I've given here.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I remember this coming to the meeting before when I was subbing for somebody. I questioned then the officers regarding it was withdrawn before I got a chance to ask them, but I was concerned about it then. What I'm particularly concerned about, as my colleagues went on about, is that for centuries people have had the view of the front of the hall. If this goes ahead, they won't get a view of the front of the hall now. However, how far away is the hall from where the original footpath is going to be diverted? If we look at the map of the hall again, if we can. Frontage of the hall.
So at the moment, people have the right to peel off at this point here. So you're only looking at that distance there. There's the hall.
Well, how far is that
and
from
the new
hall?
one is back here. So I would say 3 times the distance.
Right. Can we have the picture of the hall again, please? Right.
That's where they
That's
split
the
off
hall.
the track.
So
Yeah.
at the moment, members of the public turn left down that footpath, not going down to the hall.
They
So how
actually
far-
turn right at that point across
turn
the
right,
grassed
turn
area.
right, yeah. How far is that from the hall, distance-wise, in yards? You've got to have pretty good eyesight to see something. You get 200 yards away. If you're talking about privacy, I would suggest that's stretching things a little bit far. my eyesight's not as good as it used to be, but 200 yards is a fair distance to actually observe anything from. And of course, these days it's not just that. I mean, somebody could put a drone up and get far closer than that, and you're not going to stop that. So I agree with my colleagues. I won't be able to support this application at the present time. I'm also concerned about the surface of the new footpath. We're talking about horses. Okay, it will grass over eventually, but it might take 2 or 3 years to grass over. That's if it gets no use. If it gets a lot of use, it won't get, the grass will just wear off and we're back to square one again. So, no, I'm afraid I can't do that. I'm also concerned regarding the change of attitude of the officers from the original application to this one. So, I won't be supporting the application.
Sean?
Yes, I'm very much in agreement with Mrs. Wright there, that if you're changing the route of the footpath with no physical obstruction or any reason why, in a physical sense, that path, the original path, can't be used, I think people will rightly or wrongly feel entitled to disregard the diversion. They'll just continue using it. I've got a footpath at the side of my house, P69 in Measham. If that was suddenly extinguished without any barriers being put up, people told to go around the outside, they'd just ignore it. What would I do? Would I just stand there at the window shaking my fist at them? But I mean, there's no remedy. You've got a trespass problem now, you're going to have even more of a trespass problem, I think, if this goes ahead. So I just don't think it'll work, and I think for that reason we should refuse it. Oh, it's me, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Anyone else wish to speak? No. I mean, it was muted that a site visit might take place. I think it was thought that there was enough information on the agendas to deal with it, but I mean, if members felt that it would benefit from a site visit, either by deferring it today and having a site visit and it coming back to the next meeting, we could do that. But you know, it's up to the members whether they feel that would be of any benefit to this meeting today. I mean, what I've got on at the moment.
With respect, Chairman, I think views have been made on both sides, and I can't see the point of a site visit at all.
I agree
Dennis, sorry.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Gillard. I feel that there's all the information in here to read and to see the photographs. And I just think, it is a wonderful place, and for the owners, present owners, to have done, it's been said that they've renovated it up, and it's better than somebody not having it and letting it fall into disarray. So I will support the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
You'd support the recommendation? Do you mean Tony's proposal? Well, if there's no further talk on it, Kevin.
Using the wonders of modern science, i.e. my phone, I've just looked it up. It was actually being built in 1636 by the Ashby family, then passed through several generations of them, and then onto the. I now remember having seen these photographs, visiting it early 2000s, when the Delisle family owned it, and I can remember going to the sheds, I suppose you call them, or probably garage things, to the left of that picture, where they had cheese making. I remember going for that. But I can remember walking actually around the current footpath as well. Literally only since I saw that photograph I remembered. And it was a good footpath. It was reasonably level. But I think on the bounds of what we've got in the officer recommendation and the discussion we've had with the owner today, I'm happy to support it.
Okay, well, we might as well move to the vote then in that case, because there's Doesn't seem as anybody else wants to speak, so all in favour of Ian and...
So I'm just turning your microphone off so they can come on the webcam.
Oh, right.
When you go for the vote.
Okay. Right, proposal by Ian and seconded by Tony. All in favour of that?
Yes, so I make it that's 6 each, 6 in favour of the recommendation and 6 against. So the chairman gets the casting vote, and he was in favour of the officer's recommendation, so that passes, I believe.
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah, yes, Michael.
The committee officer assumed that you would vote the way that you voted previously. Was that correct?
You know, you vote one way and that's it, don't you, really? You know, you can't vote one way for one thing and then change your mind. Pardon?
You can.
You can.
Yeah.
The status quo.
Yeah.
Just responding to the point of order, the chairman has explained that Ewan correctly identified that he would cast his casting vote in favour of the recommendation, so that is passed.
Just had a bit of confusion.
Okay, move on to agenda item number 8 then, which is a works to a tree preservation order. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is an application by Mr. and Mrs. Bradley, 4 Manor Way, Burbage, to fell a sycamore tree for the reason that the tree is reducing the enjoyment of their property, particularly when in leaf, by casting a dense shade over most of the garden throughout the day. This causes damp conditions and requires frequent cleaning of paved surfaces. They're also concerned about the infestation of the tree by aphids that produce honeydew that in the summer covers the garden, including the seating, and their ornamental plants have a sooty mould from time to time, and also branches fall on the garden as well. The agent has identified that there is a potentially weak union at the base of the 2 codominant stems, which are these 2 here, and that's the weak union here, and that should one of the stems fail, it could cause potential damage to both property and injury to users of the garden. The Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council objects to the felling of the sycamore tree, as along with other protected trees in the rear gardens of properties on Manor Way, it contributes significantly to the amenity of the area. Burbage Parish Council similarly objects to the felling of the sycamore tree, on the grounds that it is essentially a healthy tree and has amenity value. It was found that the sycamore tree, which has the two codominant stems, are attached at a moderately acute angle and have included bark. The union, however, appears to be stable, and the risk of one of the stems breaking out is assessed as low. The crown of the tree covers 80% of the garden, and when in leaf shades most of the rear garden. This shade is moderated by the relatively high crown, allowing side light into the garden. The honeydew that falls from the aphids can be cleaned off garden furniture and slabs, and that the ornamental garden shrubs did not appear to be excessively suffering from either shade or sooty mould, which you can see here. Here are some of the shrubs. They seem in reasonable condition. That being said, the shade cast by the sycamore tree does cause the applicants a moderate loss of enjoyment of their property. The sycamore tree can be viewed from the highway, and together with the line of protected trees in the rear gardens of properties on Manor Way, the view is that it significantly contributes to the amenity of the area, and that the removal of the tree would have a significant detrimental impact on the amenity of the area. Consequently, it is recommended that consent is refused to fell the sycamore tree. I'd just like to say that the applicants emailed me and saying that they would have attended today, but they had and speak today, but they had work commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Michael.
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Second, Chairman.
Janice.
I've got concerns with this tree. Is it on like a mound, or is it on a flat surface?
On a flat surface.
It's on a flat surface?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I have concerns that some of these trees get so big for the garden, especially with the two trunks, and if there is even a low risk of problems with it, then I cannot support this recommendation for safety reasons. And I think to have your garden disrupted by having to keep cleaning your furniture because of the rubbish that's coming down, and not enjoying their garden, then I cannot go with the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Janice. Mrs. Richardson.
Can I just ask, has there been maintenance done on this tree over the years, or has it just been left to keep growing? I.e., would it not be more suitable to actually have some maintenance done on it rather than fell a tree?
There has been pruning works done historically on the tree to raise the crown and to reduce some of the branches. The tree could be reduced overall by 1.5 meters or so to just sort of make the crown a bit smaller and possibly raise the crown a little bit, and that may well, improve conditions and put less pressure on the union here.
If no one else wishes to speak, we'll move to the vote. All in favour of the recommendation? Anyone against? Two against. Okay.
Is there any abstentions?
Any abstentions? I don't think there was. No.
Are you in favour?
Yes. Okay. Move on to item number 9 then, which is another tree preservation order. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is an application by Mr. and Mrs. Pollard of 9 Park Road, Birstall, to fell an oak tree located on their property for the reason that the tree has been shedding branches for the last 6 years, and recently, 13th of July, a large diameter branch broke out and fell onto the neighbour's vehicle at number 13, causing extensive damage to the vehicle and damaging 20 metres of fencing. And then the following day, a further smaller diameter branch broke out, narrowly missing the applicant who was clearing up the previous broken branch. The fallen branches were found to have significant internal decay and have left wounds in the main stem that are showing signs of decay in the main stem and in the major structural branches. The applicants are concerned that other large diameter branches are very likely to break out, potentially causing damage to both their property and that of their neighbours, and putting themselves and their neighbours at risk of injury. The Charnwood Borough Council has objected to the felling of the oak tree on the grounds of a loss of amenity. Birstall Parish Council do not object to the felling of the oak tree but request that a replacement oak tree is planted. A local resident at number 27 Walker Road, which is this property here, has written in support of felling the oak tree, stating that the tree overhangs their property and that a number of branches have fallen from the tree into the garden and recently, and that has increased in the last few years, and is concerned that undertaking work under the tree is potentially hazardous. The application was submitted by the agent, who is a tree work contractor, who's been working on this tree for quite a number of years and knows it very well. Following a site visit, it was found that the recent failure of the 2 branches, they had internal decay, and that was evidence that there was internal decay throughout the main structural branches. The major middle structural branch, which is this one here, and sort of goes up right up into the tree, which is 30 meters, there is a decay cavity at 9 meters from the ground, and 50% of the cross section of this major branch, which supports 30 meters of branch that weighs approximately 2 tons, is at high risk of failing. The previous failure of the branches have caused the tree to be opened up to the west, making the risk of failure of existing branches a higher risk. It's concluded that the tree is potentially dangerous, and that the loss of heavy branches from the oak is resulting in the applicants and their neighbours not using areas of their garden that are under the canopy of the tree. The tree is significantly reducing both the applicants and their neighbours' enjoyment of their property. To remove the risk of branches failing, it would require extensive crown reduction of over 50% to prune back, and this would have the effect of significantly reducing the amenity of the tree, and creating large wounds which would then be more susceptible to decay. It's concluded that the removal of the tree would have a minor detrimental impact on the amenity of the area, and that on balance the significant loss of enjoyment of their property because of the potentially dangerous tree outweighs the minor loss of amenity to the public. There is sufficient space and light to plant a replacement oak tree, which would be a standard tree about 2.5 metres high. I recommend that consent is granted to fell the oak tree and that a replacement tree is planted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Ian, it's your division, so would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's a shame that we've got to lose such a fantastic tree in a village, but it is in a dangerous state. We've heard how parts of it have already fallen off, and somebody close to me was actually killed by a falling branch off a tree. So I don't have any difficulty whatsoever in moving the recommendation.
Move on to item agenda number 10. It's applicant Mr. Mick George Limited at Ibstock Brick, Leicester Road, Ibstock. Nick, would you speak to this report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Yeah, item 10 is an application for a revised restoration proposals for the Ibstock brick site. It's an application by Mick George Limited, and you'll see on the slide in front of you the site location plan. So in red is the area of land that already has a restoration scheme approved. The haulage, the route there through to Ellis Town Terrace Road is shown on the plan there. The blue area is also an area of land which is being restored by the applicant. So this image just shows the nearby streets. So the nearest residential properties are just to the northwest of the site, off Leicester Road. There is also some residential properties off Channing Way, which is just to the northeast. Probably the nearest property is here to the south west. There's a photograph in a moment that I'll show you, which is just beyond the site boundary and probably closest to the initial phase of where the importing of material would take place to facilitate the revised restoration proposals. So just a few photographs. This is a site of image of the current extraction area looking in a southerly direction. This is a photograph of the residential property that I referred to a few moments ago on Pretoria Road. You'll see that the land slopes quite steeply in front of this property, but you can see the residential area, residential properties behind, and that's been a key consideration in terms of the noise and the impacts upon that property. This is a photograph of the Hall Road. And now just moving on to a slide of what is currently approved. So the quarry workings go back a number of years. There's planning permissions dating back over 70 years for this site. Those permissions have been consolidated, and we now have a new permission dating back to 2015, and that allows material to be extracted until 2059, with site restoration taking place to 2061. Now, the approved restoration scheme on the slide in front of you shows a large body of water in the centre of the site. Now, ecologically, that's not the best solution. There are trees around the outside, you'll see on this particular image, and areas of grassland agriculture. So while that was a reasonable scheme, it wasn't the best solution, and the applicants now come forward with a much better scheme, and that is on the slide in front of you. So What we have now is more shallow ponds, which are better from a biodiversity point of view. We also have larger areas of woodland and also some natural grassland features. So those areas, from an ecological biodiversity point of view, are better. That certainly results in a much better quality restoration scheme. As I say, the proposal involves the infilling of the existing quarry void, and that will be done on a progressive nature. It will allow the clay extraction to continue, and Ibstock Brick will want to that to carry on a progressive basis. So once this area has been finished, it will be progressively restored from a southerly direction, moving northwards into the site. 11 million cubic metres of material would be brought into the site. Just over 40 years that would take to restore. There'd be 14 full-time employees. As I say, it would substantial woodland, 23.7 hectares of woodland, 15 hectares of grassland and 12 hectares of agricultural land, as well as those wetland areas, as you can see on the plan. The access for the material would be off the existing haul road off Ellistown Terrace. In terms of the numbers of materials, we're looking at 120 loads of material per day, equating to 20 movements per hour. What I would say in relation to that is that the existing quarry site that's currently being restored, those sorts of vehicle movements are already taking place onto that site. So what would happen is, once that's been restored, the material would then be, the lorries would come onto this site and move across. So in terms of the total number of vehicle movements, it's not different to what's taking place already. It's not additional movements above and beyond what's there at the moment. So in terms of the assessment, in policy terms, this does accord with the recently adopted Minerals and Waste Local Plan. This is a site that's been identified to meet demand for inner waste landfill, and has been tested at examination very recently and found to be a sound proposal. We have got a condition to ensure there's no overlap between the material being brought in to the Ellistown quarry site. So as I say, that will be kept separate. As I say, in ecological terms, the grassland and woodland features will provide a good outcome for biodiversity. There's no objections raised by our biodiversity team. We're very much in favour of what's being proposed from that perspective. In highway terms, there's a condition required for signage to prevent conflict with users of the public right-of-way. There's also new traffic signal proposed for the Ellistown Road junction that's actually taking place at the moment. So that's outside of this planning application, but that again will improve accessibility to the site. We have received 5 letters of objection. They're raising concerns about environmental matters, things like air quality, dust, light, noise and traffic. And you'll see from the report that we're content that conditions can satisfactorily control those impacts. We've had no objections from the local liaison group or from the parish councils. I'll leave it there. Happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Anything from Mr. Harrison? Ewan?
I've not received any comments from Mr. Harrison, no.
Okay. Open to members then. Ian? Sean?
Yes, just heard that there's been no objections from the liaison group. Have they actually met to consider this? Do we know?
I'm not aware of whether they have specifically, but we've had nothing from them to say they object.
Thank you, Chair. On page 83, paragraph 50, it's regarding the hours of the works, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 7 a.m. till 2 p.m. on Saturdays. I do think 7 a.m. on a Saturday is rather too early to start works for the local residents. I can understand during the week because people are getting up at 7 a.m. in the morning to go to work, but on a Saturday morning I do think that is too early, and I think if it's going to go ahead, I think we should consider starting at 9 a.m. not 7 a.m. on a Saturday.
Thank you. I think the proposed hours of operation are consistent with what's taking place on the opposite side of Ellistown Terrace Road, which are probably much closer to residential properties than what we have over here. What I would say also is, I showed you the photograph a few moments ago in relation to the nearest residential property, which is the closest point, and if there's an area of sensitivity, I think that is probably the closest point where noise could be a factor. There is actually a recommendation that we include an acoustic fence all the way above the ridge of the brow of the hill there, in order to protect those residents, and we would also require a detailed plan to show exactly where that's going to go, so the impact upon the effect of that acoustic fence would serve the greatest purpose. We believe, subject to that, those residents will be protected and wouldn't be disturbed during those hours. It isn't unusual for a 7 o'clock start of this nature, because there's always that balance of allowing them to progress quickly to restore the site versus, you know, the longevity of a very delayed long-term restoration plan. So we're content with the hours. We think that will be satisfactory. I note your concerns.
Are you proposing an amendment, Mr. Gamble, or are you doing?
Yeah, I propose an amendment to start at 9 a.m.
You want to propose?
Yeah.
Is there a seconder for that? Mrs. Richardson, did you indicate that?
Sorry, I had a question. I had a question. Oh, no, it wasn't. I was just asking the East Midlands Airport had asked for a condition to be. Sorry, East Midlands Airport had asked for a condition about bird strikes. Was that considered within the final conclusion? It was about islands for birds being stopped for bird strikes.
I'll check as I'm speaking, but I'm almost sure that the scheme that's being proposed wouldn't have that possibility of encouraging birds to behave in the way that would cause a nuisance issue or cause a safety issue. The original scheme, I think, would have had greater potential to do that. I'll double check on the report though, and I'll come back to you in a moment if that's okay.
Okay, there was no seconder, Mr. Gamble, for your proposal, so we move to the vote on this, and it was proposed by Ian, seconded by Tony. All in favour of the recommendation?
I'm happy as long as my question is answered first, because that makes a difference.
Chair, my understanding is that the the proposed island features in the water bodies were the features that would attract clusters of birds that would interfere, and that was the concern that East Midlands Airport raised. There's a condition, number 12, that requires that no island features be provided, and that in itself will basically deal with the issue that they'd raised. That's my understanding.
Content, Mrs. Richardson?
Yes,
yeah.
Just do it again.
Pardon?
Just do the vote again.
Yeah, we better just re-vote just in case anyone's altered. All in favour of the recommendation?
That's 11 in favour.
Anyone against? Abstentions, Mr. Gamble. One abstention. Jesus. What are we on now? 11? 12. Moving on to item number 11. 11 then, which is the applicant Monier Redland at Sharwell, Tarland Works, Gibbet Lane, Sharwell. Nick, would you please present this report?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so at the last DCRB meeting, we had an application to extend the sand and gravel works to the left of the tile works and members resolved to grant permission for that. This application relates specifically to the tile works, and the proposal is to extend the period of time where the tile works can operate to the 31st of December 2030. So the current permission allows for the works to take place until September 2020, so only until next year. The grant of permission would allow them to invest in the business longer term, and obviously give them the certainty that the tile works can continue. What I should say is the planning permissions that have been granted for the sand and gravel works don't run until 2030, but the local plan allocates land that potentially could get planning permission that would certainly run until that time period. So this would then correspond with the new local plan that's recently been adopted in terms of allowing the works to continue much longer. If for whatever reason planning permission isn't granted to extract additional sand and gravel, then those quarry workings were to cease, then this application, this tile works, would have to cease within 1 year of that ceasing. So it gives us control both ways anyway, and there's a condition that deals with that. Just to the right hand side is the plant site where the sand and gravel is brought to the site, processed and then used within the tile workings. This has been in operation in one form or another since the 1960s. As I say, it makes use of the material that's been extracted, so from a sustainability point of view that's very positive. You'll see from the report that concerns have been raised by the Parish Council, Sharwell Parish, about the proposals, and they're concerned about the long-term effects of extending this and whether the site would become a brownfield site, and as a result whether it would then become vulnerable to permanent forms of development. That wouldn't be the case. That this is a temporary permission. It's very much controlled in the sense that once the quarry works cease, once the tile works cease, this would need to be restored, so all the temporary buildings would need to be removed, the hard surfaces would need to be removed, and the site would need to be restored in accordance with an appropriate scheme. We're content that the application is policy compliant. We believe this allows the business to invest and continue, which retains jobs. It's positive for the local area. And we have control, as I say, in the event that the sand and gravel works cease early. We've got conditions to control vehicle trips and also to control routing. We also, as I say, have conditions in relation to temporary buildings which would need to be removed. Just a couple of photographs of the tile works there visible in the distance. I'm sorry that's not that clear. This is the access looking west and looking within the site. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Nick. Anything from Mr. Payne?
I've not received any comments from Mr. Payne, no.
Okay. Open to members. Bang. This is right.
It's just a quick question. It's just regarding, really, point 6 on the appendix and the conditions about all heavy goods vehicles leaving the site shall turn right into Gibbet Lane unless for the purpose of local tile delivery. And it's just a question around enforcement. What enforcement is there to say you turn right instead of turning left? Thank you.
It's actually much easier to control conditions like this on quarry sites than it is on things like local businesses, which I know that some authorities have had all sorts of problems. Local residents would certainly tell us if there are issues. I suppose that the distinction here is, I suppose, that there could be deliveries to local suppliers, so some vehicles could go turn the other way if they're going to deliver to some other business. I think it would be quite easy to tell, partly because of the way that residents would inform us quite regularly. We could monitor that ourselves as well. Yeah, with any of these things, you could get the odd vehicle that would turn the wrong way, and that's very hard to monitor on an individual basis. But I think over time it would be easy to gather evidence and to take action. But these are a reputable business; they need to work with us, and we've not had problems as far as I'm aware to date.
been moved and seconded then that we go with the recommendation. What are you doing?
That Mrs. Wright just said. It's related to enforcement. Who would be the enforcing authority? Because I wasn't sure whether, obviously, if a member of the public decides to complain, who do they report to? Because under normal circumstances, they're used to reporting to Harbour District Council.
It would be ourselves, so we have an enforcement officer who would be investigating if those issues were to arise.
Moving on to the last item, item number 12 then. That's erection of a warehouse unit to be used as a waste transfer purposes. Watling Street, Burbage. Applicant Mr. Hunt. Nick, would you present this report?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an application to construct a new warehouse building, and the intention is that it will be used for the transfer of waste. The site is on the A5, Watling Street, in the area of Smockington. Now, there is no defined settlement boundary here, so the site is actually within the countryside, and you'll see it's bound by agricultural fields to the north and to the east, and also on the opposite side of the road. The nearest residential properties are, as indicated, just to the southwest. There is an existing business to the northwest, or to the west, called Williams Recycling. That has no relation or interdependence with the applicant or the site, so the two businesses would run entirely separate with no links between the two. This is just a photograph of the warehouse building that's proposed. So yeah, just a standard warehouse building. We're recommending refusal on this one. We're concerned about the location of the development. This isn't a site that's within the adopted minerals and waste local plan. It's in a location that's not close to an existing urban area where you'd expect waste transfer facilities to be located. It's a good 2.5 kilometres from the edge of Burbage and Hinckley, and not in a location, as I say, where you'd expect this type of facility to go. The other point is that within our minerals and waste local plan we have identified sites for the transfer of waste, and this does not appear, this isn't a site that we have chosen or would choose to choose for our strategic waste transfer purposes. So yeah, first of all, and I think that's probably the main reason for refusal, we're recommending refusal on the basis in the wrong location. It's also in the countryside on a greenfield site, and we're not content that is an appropriate location. Now, there has been previous uses on this site, but the applicant would need to demonstrate to us that this is a previously developed site in order to address countryside policies. But even if they were to do that, as I say, this isn't a location we'd expect to see waste transfer facilities. There are other more technical reasons for refusal, which are set out in the report. The applicant should be required for a case like this to demonstrate there are no ecological impacts, so badgers and bats are considerations that we'd need to take into account. They haven't supplied that information. We'd also expect them to consider the impacts of noise upon those residential properties, and while there are background noise levels on the A5, they should still be demonstrating to us that those residents wouldn't be unduly affected. They haven't done that. The final issue is in relation to highway safety. So while there are no objections from our highway colleagues, there is a concern from Highways England. The A5 is a strategic trunk road, and that they would need to be satisfied that there's not going to be any problems with highway safety, either turning into or out of the site or backing onto the site through manoeuvring within the service area. And the applicant hasn't demonstrated that despite requests that we put to the applicant. So there are 4 reasons for refusals, therefore, and yeah, we're content that they are robust. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Anything from Mrs. A. Wright?
No comments from Mrs. A. Wright.
Okay. Oh. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I understand, when we say waste transfer station, do we mean black bags, or do we mean waste as in recycling as well? Because if they were using that and then sorting it and taking it to Williams Recycling, which is next door, that would fit in with the local plan, wouldn't it?
It wouldn't fit into the local plan, as in it's not a site that's been allocated for this purpose, and if they wanted to be joined up uses, there's no reason why Williams Recycling couldn't propose that themselves within their site and operate differently. We've asked for that information and they've confirmed there's no links to that business, there's no intention that the material will be used on Williams Recycling, so there's no sustainability benefits of that, and therefore we take it on its merits as a standalone facility. Just in terms of the processing, it isn't a recycling operation. It's the intention is that material will be brought in, it will be processed, put into a form that could be easily taken out and then distributed elsewhere. So it's literally bring it in, take it out.
In answer to my question, it wouldn't be just waste, it would be waste and recyclers.
Potentially it could be different types of material. If we were to recommend approval, we'd want to control the type of material, but yeah.
Recommendation has been been proposed to refuse this application. All in favour? Oh, sorry, Janice, you wanted to speak then. You did.
And thank you. You know, is it what they refer to as the Smockington Hollow? Sorry? It's referred to as the Smockington Hollow, which why I'm asking, the piece of green on the road, like a... I know if that's the one that turns up to, is it Sapcote, Sharnford? No, I've got the wrong bit.
It's the Wolvie turn.
The Wolvie turn, yeah. Okay, that's all I wanted to ask, but I still second it, thank you. I thought it was like the Smockington Hollow. Yeah, it does say that.
All in favour
Chairman,
again?
I have to just query, because it does say Smockington, so... Yeah, so there's been many accidents and deaths over the years there, so I recommend the second...
I think that's the concern from Highways England, that there has been safety concerns and they would want to make sure it functions
on the
appropriately.
report, yeah. That's why I second the recommendation.
Right,
Okay.
We've got halfway through the vote anyway.
Sorry, Chairman.
Tony. Yes.
Was there any against?
Is that it?
Was there any? What did you vote for?
That was unanimous.
Item 13, any other items which the chairman's decided to take as urgent? We haven't any of those. Item 14 is chairman's announcement. Well, thank you very much. The meeting's closed. Thank you.
I know there's been many deaths at the Smockington Hollow, but they call it Smockington Hollow because it is.
I didn't know it was called that. I know
Yeah,
the real
yeah, Smockington Hollow. I know over the years there's been countless deaths.
Well, it's a bit of a mess around there, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so busy.
It's not really a very good place to have.
No, definitely not. The road is horrendous.
Oh, sorry. See you later.